Hello, everyone. I do hope that the sun is shining on you. It hasn't been shining here, but welcome to the latest in our session on research in the market research sector in the UK and the MRS's response to it. Just a couple of housekeeping points before we start. You will all be on mute, and please type all your questions into the Q&A section on the site. And then those will be moderated at the end. And if we don't have enough time, we will certainly get back to you with answers specific to you. The session is being recorded and it will be available to you in about a week from now. So just a few notes on what we're going to cover today in the agenda. So that's me, I'm Jane Frost, I'm your CEO. And I'm going to invite in a couple of seconds Sinead Jeffries, who is on the MRS board and has kindly been leading on this research, to take you through the results. Then I'll come back and talk to you about a few of the things that we are doing and in the middle of at the moment to move some of the big issues forward. And then Deborah, who is the genius on all things guidance and standards and policy, will be briefing you on the latest guidance, and then we've got time for Q&A. So without more ado, I'll hand you over to the most interesting person here, who's Sinead, so to take you through the results.
Great, thank you very much, Jane. And I hope I live up to my billing of being the most interesting person here. This is a follow-up to two previous waves of research that we've done to understand the impact of COVID-19 on the research sector. So we did the first one in April, May 2020, very early days when we were all in the first round of lockdown and quite a lot of uncertainty. We did a further wave in August last year as things were kind of starting to change and confidence was returning. And then the final wave we've done a few months ago, we did in April, May of this year. So this is really going to take you through three sections, because actually what we've done in this wave, as well as kind of looking at the impact of COVID-19, we've also covered Brexit, we've covered sustainability, we've covered people's kind of views on the return to office and all of that. So it's a slightly more wide-ranging survey, and I'm going to give you a quick whistle-stop tour of each of those areas. So firstly, kind of looking at that kind of follow-on on the impact of COVID-19. So in each wave of the survey, we have seen a decline in those people who say that their revenues have been affected negatively. Their revenues have fallen since the beginning of the pandemic. So back in April, May 2020, almost 9 in 10 businesses in the sector said that they had a decline in revenue. That kind of stepped down 76% in August and now at 67% in the most recent wave. What we have seen across all of that time period, though, is that smaller agencies, those with kind of up to 9 employees or those with revenues under £1 million, are most likely to have seen their revenues decline and have been the hardest hit. Because actually, even though, you know, we have seen a kind of lessening of the degree of impact since the first wave to the most recent wave, there are still 2/3 of businesses in the sector saying that COVID has had a negative impact on revenue. Looking at the areas, the types of work that people are doing and how each of those have been affected, the areas that have been hardest hit, unsurprisingly, have been those involving face-to-face. So both face-to-face qual and face-to-face quant have seen a significant part of their work either reduced or stopped completely. Two things to look at here. First is that qual has been harder hit than quant. So a greater proportion of that has been fully stopped. But also that we have seen a better recovery for face-to-face quant than we have as of April earlier this year for face-to-face qual. So where we saw when we got to kind of April, May this year, there was only 44% saying that their face-to-face quant was stopped. That was still up at 63% for face-to-face qual. Now, obviously, with things opening up a little bit more since then, we know that kind of lots of viewing facilities, lots of face-to-face call has been happening again, but certainly that has been harder hit and has been slower to recover and slower to start opening up again. And I know Deborah's later going to come on to talk about kind of some of the latest guidance around face-to-face research. The other area that has also been the third most hard hit area was paper and postal quant. Obviously there has been a lot of impact in terms of the requirement for people to process a lot of that, but also probably the type of work that's being conducted is the type of work, so whether it's been government research or things like that, or surveys that relied on kind of the postal service when that was badly affected, that has also been hit, although that has recovered to a greater extent than the first two. In terms of the flip side of that, the areas that have been actually most likely to increase and least likely to have been reduced over the time period, again, as the inverse of what we saw in terms of face-to-face call, online call is the area that's seen most positive impact of the changes in the last year. So that there was already a lot of companies seeing the increase in use of that back in April, May last year, and that has increased even more so. We're now at the stage where kind of 68% are saying that their online call has reduced as based on the current situation affected by COVID-19. Online quant has also been boosted to a certain extent, and telephone quant and call, although to a lesser extent. Strategic consultancy just about makes it onto this slide as kind of one of the ones that have seen most increases, but that is more a case of it being less reduced or stayed the same, although what we have seen is an increase in that in the most recent months. So people going back to more strategic types of research in the kind of first quarter, second quarter of this year. In terms of the people side of the impact, so 60% of companies within the sector furloughed staff at some point in the last year, which is quite a high proportion. Within that, for a lot of companies, that was something that affected a high proportion of their people overall. So kind of 4 in 10 of those companies who furloughed people, it was more than half of all their staff affected at some point. So 40% of companies who furloughed staff saw more than half of all employees affected at some point. There were a few where it was kind of, a minor kind of proportion, 10%, sort of 11 to 25%. But that is a lot of people who at some point in the last year within this sector have been put onto furlough. Now, although that hasn't affected people necessarily in the long term, that was been a period of uncertainty for a lot of people, unsure about what was going to happen. And obviously, as a result of that, we know that a number of companies have had to go on and make redundancies just because of the feasibility of continuing. So those are kind of some of the key headlines on the COVID side of things. Moving on to the other big uncertainty that has affected us and continues to affect us is the impact of Brexit. What we were seeing in April and May certainly is the majority of businesses within the sector say that Brexit has either had no impact on their revenues or they're just not sure what impact it might have had. There are around kind of 20%, so just over 1 in 5, saying that it has negatively impacted their revenues. And where that is coming from is largely down to just a general economic uncertainty, or uncertainty about kind of how to do things, uncertainty about the larger economic situation, but also we're getting people reporting that they are seeing an impact because insight decision making is moving outside the UK. So we've got a combination of sort of comments there from people. So issues with being outside the EU, clients concerned about how to pay us, whether we're able to go and see them, how we get over VAT. So one business there saying they've set up a legal entity in Dublin. Clients moving insight functions from UK to Europe, European clients less inclined to conduct research in the UK, and just this general idea of uncertainty, which has caused businesses to stop spending, and business priorities changing, cost of operating have changed. So that is the kind of key issue at the moment, is a lot of uncertainty, as well as just some of those legal barriers that people are still trying to kind of navigate around. We also looked at kind of where people are procuring products and services from. So whether that's their own, within their own kind of supply chain or subcontracting work, and where they are supplying services to. And again, that is at any point throughout the research chain. So that might be a full service agency in the UK supplying services to France or to the USA, or it might be a sort of a supplier of kind of data provision or field work supplying to kind of clients in those other locations. What we are seeing is that overall, countries within the EEA, so within the EU plus the broader European Economic Area, and also the USA, so almost on a par there as the top two markets for both export of services and procurements of products and services within the sector. The next most likely are kind of Australia, Canada, South Africa. And what we're seeing is they are more likely to be supplied to than procured from. With the reverse true for China, Brazil, India, and Turkey, we're more likely to procure services from those countries than supply them to. And a lot of the data in this survey is being obviously to kind of help our MRS understanding of what's going on with the sector and some of the kind of the challenges and issues and what that means we need to look at in terms of how we provide support to the sector, but also for negotiations and conversations with government, so helping them to understand where the most important trade agreements need to be, where we're most likely to be trying to do business with, and particularly kind of in the context post-Brexit. In terms of where people are getting advice or have been getting advice on Brexit, so around half of companies within the survey, so 51% said that they'd referred to government advice on Brexit, and a similar proportion, 53%, had referred to MRS guidance on Brexit. What we are seeing, though, and kind of huge kudos to Deborah and the rest of the regulatory team within MRS, is the advice from MRS is more useful to them than the government advice. So more than 4 in 10 of people saying that government advice was not very or not at all useful to them. Obviously, again, one of the benefits that we've been able to do within our MRS is look at making sure that the advice, the guidance has been made relevant to this sector rather than generic advice, which is sometimes difficult to navigate. So there has been a recognition of the advice that's been provided within the sector on Brexit. So looking at sustainability as another area, and there has been a recent webinar looking at kind of people's attitudes within the sector to sustainability, and I know that webinar is available on the MRS website. And what we are seeing is it is really an issue that people feel strongly about within this sector. Business leaders that we've spoken to are leaning strongly towards making commitments as a business to being more sustainable. So on the left-hand side, though, they're 13% saying it's something we take very seriously. We've made major commitments as a business to improving sustainability or moving toward net zero, and a further 46% saying it's something we do think is very important. We've made some changes as a business. One of 4 saying it's fairly important, we've not taken much action. What we are seeing is that, generally the leaning is very much towards the side of people saying, actually, we see it's important, we want to do something about it, we want to make a commitment as a business to helping this situation. In terms of what's driving that, so why is it that people want to do this? Why do they want to improve their sustainability to reduce carbon emissions? There's a general feeling it's really driven by principles and beliefs, both for business leaders themselves, but also for their people. So we feel it's the right thing to do. It's an important issue to me personally. It's an important issue for our staff. Those are the real key strong factors coming through in terms of why people want to do something. There's that belief and commitment that it is something that should be being done. In terms of what the barriers are, and again, kind of looking at what support might need to be put in place around that, understandably, perhaps particularly so given the context of the last year, there have been other things that have been bigger business priorities. That's been the key barrier that people have faced in terms of actually going ahead and taking action. But also people saying, actually, we need to support on what to do and how to do it. I've got no idea where to start doing something about it. Another one that's quite interesting as well, and we get this, and anybody who's done research with consumers in this is kind of feeling, actually, we're too small to make a difference. I'm just one person. What can I do? Or we're too small to make a difference. And I think Jane's going to come on to talk a little bit about the net zero pledge. The principle is that actually everybody can make a difference. So it's not necessarily that you say, actually, we need to leave it to the big companies. And that's something that we want to look at, is actually how everybody can play a part regardless of size. Home office working. So again, we were talking about April, May, as things do. They changed on a daily basis, let alone in the space of a couple of months. At that point, the majority of business still had at least 3/4 of staff working from home full time. There were some businesses which had a minority at home, so only 10%. But for the majority of cases, it was either all staff or more than 75% of staff at home full time. For those who were going into the office, the top reason is for mental well-being benefits. People just needed to get out of the home and needed to go into the office. But also more general reasons, like they've had too much from working at home, as well as logistical issues. The type of work they do can't be done at home. We need somebody in the office, etc., etc. The other reasons that people mentioned that weren't part of that list were kind of things around kind of the need for collaboration, the need for social interactions. And we also want to understand what people's intentions were. And again, context of being this was back in April and May. There was a real split between businesses who said, actually, once restrictions are eased, once we're kind of in that state where we can kind of make better decisions around what we need to do, there was a split between businesses who said, actually, we are going to give our people full flexibility to work from home or the office, depending on what they prefer. And the similar proportion, or exactly the same proportion, 1 and 3, saying we expect that we're going to set out a combination of sort of hybrid, sort of 2 to 3 days in the office, 2 to 3 days at home. And those are the real kind of key things that business leaders were expecting to do within this sector. And those who were kind of saying something else is actually mostly people who were already fully home working pre-COVID, that they were already doing that. The things that might prevent people from returning to work was actually a kind of a preference now for working at home. That was something that people said, actually, the reason they're not going to come back to the office is because they find that they prefer or get on better working from home. But also concerns about using public transport, about being out in public, whether they've been vaccinated or not. But also, and I know how many conversations I have with people who've moved house in the last year, people have relocated, they live further away from the office, they're less likely to be coming into the office physically now that they've experienced the opportunity to kind of live somewhere that gives them potentially a better quality of life that is further away from the office. So looking ahead, looking at what people are kind of anticipating for the year ahead, the key things that people sort of are saying are likely to affect their business throughout the rest of 2021, which things do they most agree with, are things that they're going to see them. The top 2 are, again, regarding this idea of kind of changing the way they work. Flexible and hybrid working are the key changes that businesses within the sector are anticipating in the year ahead. So that either whether that's offering greater flexible and remote working options they did previously, or an intention to move to some kind of hybrid working. It's the biggest change that people are anticipating following the impact of the pandemic. But also a lot of positivity. So kind of we're going to continue to grow the business, and we're refocusing the business, changing the work we do, and a lot of anticipation that revenues this year will be higher than 2020. Hopefully that's going to be not too hard to achieve given the challenges that so many people faced in 2020. Focusing on the UK market, recruiting more staff in the UK. So really looking at kind of that sort of changing the ways of working, but also kind of positivity and anticipation of kind of greater revenues, growing the business, seeing new business return to levels. That said, there are still a kind of proportion of people who don't think those things are likely. So around kind of between a quarter and a third saying actually they don't see new business returning to levels seen pre-COVID, or they don't necessarily think that revenues are going to be higher than last year. So I think with a lot of what we say, there is some positivity coming through. There are still a kind of sizable proportion of people who've got concerns and who are uncertain still about what the future might look like. That said, what we have seen is that levels of optimism generally among business leaders are significantly higher than they were in the same period last year. There are virtually no people now saying that they're feeling very pessimistic looking ahead. What we're seeing, so what we saw back in April, May 2020 was people's optimism about the next quarter was very, very low. In looking, their optimism for the next 6 months was slightly higher, but not much. Their optimism for the next 12 months was higher. So as they looked further ahead, they had slightly greater levels of optimism. What we're seeing now is actually the levels of optimism are pretty much the same, regardless of whether you're talking about next quarter, next 6 months, next 12 months. So people are kind of have got a slightly longer term view of where they can feel optimistic and where they can kind of see hope ahead. Whereas before, short-term optimism was very, very limited. The key reasons that people are giving for seeing optimism, for feeling optimistic. So seeing signs of core clients making inquiries about strategic projects. There's found new relationships during the pandemic and those are continuing. People saying actually they're busier than they have been for several years, although the pipeline's not long, so it might disappear, but for the moment being very busy. And also feeling that the shocks to the market are easing, kind of Brexit, COVID, etc., etc. Business are optimistic about the kind of understanding the new normal and hoping that budgets for research will be increased again. And actually the fact that clients need help to navigate the new landscape. The areas where people are still feeling pessimistic, generally kind of that sort of the momentum that was lost last year. And I think particularly kind of businesses where they had to cut down a lot on staff, they were very effective in the short term. That's broken those long-term relationships. But they've also had to switch from higher margin to lower margin research. And we saw earlier the impact of kind of things switching to online. So there have been changes in the business models, and that's not necessarily helped their kind of business prospects. Also kind of that uncertainty, not sure whether we can, for example, again, talking in kind of April, May, whether we can book hall tests if there's going to be another lockdown. And also kind of people saying actually a lot of our clients chose not to survey their customers during COVID, and now still back in that time in April and May showing hesitancy. So a variety of things still there that people are still seeing that uncertainty, even though the balance is tipped towards people feeling more optimistic than they were previously. So just kind of some key areas to pull out to watch for over the coming months, both in terms of the work that people are done, but also kind of things that are going to impact the sector. So obviously the ongoing impact on face-to-face, both quant and qual. Things are becoming easier. There are kind of better ways of doing things, but that has been the major hit from a methodological perspective, has been face-to-face, particularly in the qualitative world. Also, I think something to kind of keep an eye on, and something to understand more about, is kind of what is the impact if clients are moving decision making outside the UK into the EU. Is that going to kind of change the dynamic of what's happening within the sector in the UK? What are the opportunities that might present for us? So really understanding what the impact of that is, and how much that is going to be a kind of even medium term shift, let alone a longer term shift. This whole area around sustainability, it's clearly something that's very important. So what's it going to mean for companies in our sector to achieve net zero? What needs to happen? There's been a lot of talk about it, and I know Jane's going to talk about that again in a moment, is what does it mean? What does it look like? How can we work towards getting there? And I think also, one of the big things that people are recognizing is a major change for how they're going to work, is this kind of move to hybrid and remote workplaces. So making sure that the training, the support, the development are there to help businesses and help people thrive in that new world of work. Making sure that people are equipped to do their jobs. How do we make sure that people are still getting their opportunities to progress, to network, to do all of those things? There's a lot of work for people to kind of think about. And hopefully there'll be the opportunity for lots more training, etc., via the MRS to help do that. So that was it from me, and I'm going to hand back. As Jane says, we'll take questions at the end. So if you've got any questions on that, hold fire, and I can pick them up once we've gone through everything. But I will pass back now to Jane to look at shaping the future.
Thank you for that, Sinead. Very useful and very clear. And I did warn everyone that I was maybe it's the beef paste in the gorgeous outer that is the sandwich of Deborah and Sinead. But some of you may have remembered that I've talked a number of times about actually having a very clear core strategy for responding to even the fastest changing environment. And the three core pillars of that remain absolutely clear to us. And one is maintaining standards and professionalism. Two is generating a much clearer, stronger shared narrative so that we are actually speaking with one voice to clients and our stakeholders if we are a client. And three is working together to create a sector that is fit for the future. I'm not going to spend any time on the first element. A bit of what that is being covered by Deborah, except to say that it is rather ironic that the government, in their defence of the judicial review cases on procurement that have been brought, have tried to emphasise that everything is okay because everyone commits to working to the MRS Code of Conduct and Standards, and that is required by the government, to which I did think that the rest of the defence was therefore even more ironic. We are working very hard to expand company partner accreditation, not only obviously amongst agencies, where we have the vast majority of agencies signed up, but also amongst clients. And we've introduced there an international affiliate group of companies. I'm delighted to have signed Carlsberg Worldwide as the latest one of those, but also I was really dead chuffed to discover NATO on the list. I desperately want to know what sort of research NATO is doing and why it needs research, because I think that could be a great case study. In terms of two, the key thing here is working with the Senior Client Council, all of whom have experienced an increased importance of their work and a merging of a lot of their data sets with some from the more traditional areas in their companies, and are looking to build on that going forward. So we do have a great opportunity there. But I really like to concentrate on element 3 of this, which is creating a sector that is fit for the future. And I seem to have a frozen screen. Oh, there we are. Thank you. This is the pledge that we promised a long time ago and we've been working hard towards, which is the MRS Net Zero Pledge, a manifesto for sustainability. And we worked on this hard with the Insights Climate Collective and a number of people who I'll show you from around the MRS. But clearly it was something that needed to be done. And some of you may remember that a couple of years ago at Impact, we did actually talk about, with Extinction Rebellion, about how we might contribute to that overwhelming need we have to try and improve the sustainability, to do our a bit for COP26 and achieving net zero. And Extinction Rebellion were very, very clear at the time that everyone, however small, could make a contribution. And we've actually thought about this in creating the Net Zero Pledge. And one of the elements of the Net Zero Pledge is that it is there so that agencies and suppliers of all sizes can actually sign up. And I'm delighted that we now have, I think, about 36 people signed up, which is a great start. And it starts obviously with a clear commitment. And this is the fact that we do acknowledge, well, I hope we all acknowledge, that climate change is now a problem that we cannot ignore. And we believe that our sector really specifically has a key role to play in transforming both business and society, because we have that knowledge base that can provide the evidence that can make a difference. So it's a simple 4-point pledge. Those of you who know me and know MRS know that we are trying not to make things so complex that nobody can remember them. And there's a very clear commitment within the pledge to making our businesses net zero by 2026. This is, funnily enough, a year faster than the advertising sector are planning to do it, but was agreed by everyone we consulted that this was an ambition that we should be setting, because we did feel that this had to be a real ambition. And in doing that, we really do need to track and publish our carbon emissions, looking to either reduce or offset. And we will be reporting those results in the industry report at the end of the year. I'm aware this is a very, very complex area, and there are so many ways in which people are operating to reduce or offset emissions. And we do know that this is a dialogue that we must continue. And we also know that people will require help to do it. So we do believe that we should be collaborating across the sector as a whole and with other sectors, so that we can actually pass on and share joint learnings. And again, those of you who did come to Impact 2021 will have heard several CMOs, notably from Mars in particular, that's the one I remember, talking about the fact that clients expect us to be collaborating. They don't think this is about competitive advantage. This is about actually genuinely all of us saving each other. And therefore, part of what we do as a unique sector is to have conversations based on our understanding of customers with our partners and clients, and also with our employees, so that we can elaborate their concerns, that we can actually create a dialogue that will create and make a difference. And as I said, this is probably one of the key areas where the Tesco every little help mantra works best. So the Sustainability Council grew out of the Net Zero Pledge Working Committee, and I'm very delighted to have Steve Phillips, who's the CEO of Zappi, as our chair. And we have drawn members of the council who do flex with whatever problem we are addressing from around the various types of agencies that are in our sector. So it is both a flexing and a wide-ranging group of people. And very recently, we put up a carbon calculator on the Net Zero Pledge site on MRS. This is inevitably not a free calculator. We couldn't find a free calculator anywhere, but the calculator that is up there has been developed and improved with the Insight Climate Collective's help, and is designed for use by agencies, and the costs for using it flex according to what the size and turnover of your business is, and to how much you want to use. So for a small business using very little, it could be as little as £7.50 a month or something like that. And the other thing that the council is working on is actually trying to provide extra advice on navigating the complexity of the supplier scene and the various initiatives that are available to help us achieve net zero. One of the things that we'll be putting up very shortly is a very, very interesting discussion on what actually makes a green energy supplier, because as with everything in these areas, things ain't always what they seem on the label. So the other half of that is clearly, of course, about talent. And the MRS Inclusion Pledge was launched a couple of years ago with a very clear view that a sector like ours that actually holds a mirror to the world should in fact represent the world it is reflecting. And in this area, we now have 46 agencies signed up. And very interesting to me, it is not the same footprint as it is necessarily for the Green Pledge. So although the key very large agencies are all participating in both sides, of the small and medium-sized concerns, there's quite a variety of different people coming into signing up to the pledge. And again, this pledge doesn't stay static, because the world doesn't stay static. And as Sinead said, in research, we're used to things moving on very, very fast. And particularly with this one, we believe that we need to make sure that we're keeping up with best practice in the outside world. So this was updated this year to reflect the creation of CORE, the Ethnic Minority Network, and their views on representation. I'd like to emphasize that none of this says anything about you need to have quotas. It actually asks you to work towards an improvement with some targets that reflect where the government is. And those are targets we'd like to achieve, and we'd like to be better than, actually, because the government isn't necessarily as robust as some areas might be. But it's not about quotas, because we recognise that everyone is starting from a different place. There are different forms of ownership. There are different histories. There are different ages to the supply chain. So it's absolutely clear that this is set to enable us all to have the discussion within our businesses and to work towards an improvement. And when we do get government statistics, it's always been quite clear that our sector isn't as good as we think it should be in looking at things like pay parity and the disparity for women, and from our own data for ethnic minorities in the sector. I do urge you to read some of the stuff that we have on the website, including what the advertising sector says they think is the best report out on where we are on diversity in research. And we again have a Diversity and Inclusion Council group. It is chaired by Babita Earle, who is from ZAPI. It does include a representative from all the networks that are representing specific groups within our communities, and people have specific responsibilities within it. So I'm really delighted to have this much support in moving forward, and particularly the support of newer networks like CORE. But I have to shout out for MRS Pride, because they've been doing a wonderful job in actually creating a voice for that community and not being afraid to have a voice. It's absolutely delightful working with them. But this is a group that's moving forward on a very large number of projects, each led by one of the people on the group, and will flex with a number of the programs that it has in place. So a number of things that you may have noticed recently is our support and sign up for 100 Black Interns program. We're still on track to launch an MRS apprenticeship scheme, which we think is the key thing to change both social inclusion profiles and ethnic minority profiles in our sector. We're working on the next stage of the Inclusion Pledge, which is a pledge for sole traders, because clearly we have a lot of sole traders who want to commit to better inclusion practice, but obviously don't fit with the commitments made in the main pledge. I'm delighted to see the launch of MRS Unlimited, which is a network available for neurodiversity and physical disability. That launched just a couple of weeks ago. And in hand is the development of a network for social inclusion. And with all these networks, this is about obviously giving people a voice to get heard. And a key thing that is on our list and is making huge progress at the moment is the representation in research group, which is looking at how well we do reflect the population, the diversity of the population in how we sample, how we promote better inclusive practices in research. And I'm really, again, absolutely over the moon with the progress that is going on there. So as I finish, I would like to show you a rogues gallery. You may recognize some of the faces here. This is our research heroes, the first tranche of our research heroes. I think the Research Heroes programme, for which the first tranche reported about a month ago, and these are the very, very worthy winners, does reflect an ability for us to be able to pay attention to those who don't necessarily get a voice or get noticed in our sector, and to also promote the activities of the sector. So many people talk about what people have done during COVID. I think we forget very rapidly the contribution our sector has made to the COVID recovery programme, including obviously testing, but the wonderful work of so many research agencies and people within clients supporting their colleagues and their network. So these people have all received this absolutely wonderful and incredibly colourful certificate. I know Deborah has it up in her office at the moment because I spotted it the other day. And I'd like to encourage all of you, please, to look around your networks, find the people who don't normally get noticed, but who've done something that really deserves a well done, and let us know. The next tranche, the summer tranche, has a couple of days left to run. We've already had 10 submissions in there, and there will be an autumn tranche which you can put names forward for as well. It is free, it is there. Please to recognise the people that don't get noticed. So with that plea to you all to join in and not clap for carers, but certainly send a certificate to somebody who deserves it, I will hand over to Deborah.
Hello, good afternoon, everybody. It's lovely to see you, well, sort of see you this afternoon. I'm going to talk about the MRS guidance and to update you on where we are with COVID-19. So I'm going to talk about the general data collection guidance, our approach since the 19th of July, and our approach more generally, and a reminder about some of the key requirements, including what we've got coming up for in-home. I'm then going to touch briefly on vaccinations, both corporate guidance and about policies towards participants, because these are some of the questions that have been coming through Codeline. Okay, so the COVID-19 MRS guidance. Well, what a long year and a half it has been. We've actually issued the first set of guidance in mid-May 2020, and they've been updated pretty much every month thereafter. Their focus has very much been complementing the government advice on working safely during COVID-19. But the scope of the guidance, and this is very important, is it is an extension of the MRS Code of Conduct. The must requirements are mandatory, the should requirements are recommended, but also that local guidance applies where research is taking place. So if you're doing a UK-wide project, there is different applicable guidance in England, Northern Ireland, Scotland, and Wales, because this is one of the devolved responsibilities. And so when looking and mirroring the government guidance, there is actually variations in between. In terms of the structure, we have definitions linked to COVID. Then we have the requirements for the commencement of face-to-face data collection, including design and selection and use of practitioners. Then we talk more generally about face-to-face participant recruitment and during face-to-face, and then look specifically at a different range of environments, in-home, which is actually door-to-door at the moment because in-home is currently not allowed, in-street, exit interviews, and in transit and in halls and venues. And we have separate guidance on mystery shopping, using facilities for research, and also the Scottish protection level system. As I mentioned, our approach has been very much focused on taking the government advice and then mirroring any requirements within it, but also translating that advice into what the research sector needs to do. So very similar to what we did with Brexit, we follow what has to be done, but we turn it into language that you recognise, but also focus on the key things that are applicable to our sector. From the 19th of July, that approach still applies. Now, of course, the guidance has significantly changed, particularly in England. So the UK government had, I think it was about 22 different documents for different types of working environments. Those have all been consolidated, and now there's about six different guidance documents. And for example, there's one on construction and other outdoor working, which is probably the most significant because that really is about for those people that are working in a non-office based environment. So that's a key document for us, and that document still exists. But also the important thing from the 19th has been that we have to continue to adhere to any client corporate guidance when it's operating at a higher level of safety than the government guidance. So if, for example, you were doing some research for Transport for London, then of their guidance, there are certain things, particularly to do with wearing facial coverings, which is obviously higher than the England government guidance is at the moment. But also, generally speaking, continue to be cautious in environments where there are likely to be participants who may be clinically extremely vulnerable. So that's health and social care settings. So continue to be cautious and cognizant of the fact that there are people for whom COVID-19 is still a huge issue and could be massively damaging for them if they were to get the infection. In Scotland, continue to follow the MRS guidance on interpreting the protection level system. So that guidance still exists. The protection level system still exists in Scotland. And this has been updated because Scotland also issued new guidance on the 19th of July. So fundamentally, the core of that document is the same, but the Scottish government has slightly changed what you can do under different levels. And Scotland at the moment is at level 0. For doorstep and in-street environments without any government, corporate or health-based restrictions, wear facial coverings and adhere to social distancing. That continues to be the MRS advice. And we get a lot of questions about this topic, not I think because people disagree with it, but they just want to really understand what it actually means. So for all 4 nations, we recommend you continue to wear facial coverings and social distance, despite the fact that the UK government's position in England is to relax these restrictions. Why is that? if we don't retain the trust of the public, we might as well all go home. People can live long and happy lives without ever taking part in market research. And we have to be very cognizant of that. So we need to retain the trust of the public. And we don't know until you actually approach a participant and start talking to them what their attitude is to facial coverings and social distancing. And as a result, we have to assume that anyone we approach has concerns, because we know that there is still a significant proportion of the public that do. And so when you're approaching someone and you're recruiting them, you need to be wearing those facial coverings. And of course, this also does reduce the likelihood of infection as well, and also protects the interviewer or the researcher who's undertaking the recruitment. So what do we mean by social distancing? Well, of course, now that there is different social distancing operating in different parts of the UK's 4 nations. So in some parts of the country, it is still saying 2 meters, and others 1 meter plus, and in other parts of the country, nothing at all. What we are saying is that 2 meters, if you can achieve 2 meters, is preferable. If not, you should be going for 1 meter plus. Except in those environments where you're not in control of the situation, then you must endeavour to do that. So something like mystery shopping, if you're mystery shopping and you're doing it on a bus, for example, the bus suddenly could become crowded. And so again, for those kind of situations where for mystery shoppers and stuff, they should endeavour to do it and should take steps, if they are in a crowded environment, to get out of a crowded environment in terms of mystery shopping. So are there exemptions to this? Yes, there are. Facial coverings do cause distress to some participants. It certainly can create problems with communication for certain types of individuals, some children, some vulnerable adults, or those that are or have strong feelings about facial coverings. It can cause distress. In those kind of instances, you may, with agreement, and it has to be with express agreement of the participant, remove the facial covering. But what I would say that particularly if there are problems with communication, something like if you've got somebody who is hard of hearing, it might actually be better to be diverting people to a different methodology at that point anyway. But there are within the rules the sort of the ability for, if you like, on the ground, agile risk assessments to be undertaken, so that that the interviewers, if they're happy, the participant, they're happy, that the facial coverings can be removed. Also, from the 19th of July, we introduced some clear new rules and requirements to do with venues and viewing facilities. This was really because, obviously, with the opening up, there is more of a demand for research to be face-to-face, and for that to be in things like venues and viewing facilities. For data collection undertaken in viewing facilities, the research practitioners must continue to use facial coverings and social distancing in areas where members of the public may reside. So things like reception areas, waiting rooms, common areas within buildings and so on. Then those that are undertaking part of the research process, and that would include the support staff within the facility, they must continue to wear facial coverings, because again, you don't know what the attitude is of somebody who might walk into your reception, into your waiting rooms, and so on. Facilities must continue to provide clear guidance on how to reduce the risk of spreading COVID-19 to people when they arrive at their facilities, and that's, for example, with on-site signage and visual aids and lines on the carpet and all those kinds of things. And facilities must take steps to improve the ventilation in their viewing facilities. Ventilation is a very important part of the guidance, the government guidance, and it has been strengthened from the 19th of July, so that you need to think about fully or partially opening windows, using mechanical ventilation systems, air vents, opening doors. But within the research context, if you are doing these kinds of activities, you have to do that whilst continuing to protect the participant confidentiality during the data collection. What we don't want is people in groups and the doors and windows open, and there are people that are walking past and hearing what they're saying, because clearly that is going to have a significant effect on the way that people feel comfortable or not about talking and participating in qualitative research. Now, if the research practitioners wish to undertake data collection in viewing facilities without social distancing. So this is not in the common areas, not in the reception areas. This is once you actually get into the viewing facility that with the two-way mirrors or whatever type of facility it is. If research practitioners and moderators wish to undertake research without social distance and facial coverings, they must ensure that participants are recruited on this basis. So in effect, it is about should be no surprises with participants. Participants who are surprised when they walk into a group environment are those that are likely to complain. So if you wish to undertake research in this way, then people must be recruited on the basis that there will not be social distancing and there will not be facial coverings. Similarly, if the data collection is to be with facial coverings and social distancing, then participants must be recruited on this basis, because there are, as I've already mentioned, a segment of the population who really reject facial coverings and social distancing. So we have to be cognizant of their expectations and needs as well. So it's all about transparent recruitment that is really key. Once data collection is due to start, though, research practitioners must also undertake kind of like an agile risk assessment on the ground before the facial coverings are removed and social distancing is no longer in place, to make sure that the conditions which are appropriate for that kind of group are in place. So that's things like the ventilation and so on. And once, if all participants and research practitioners are willing and agree that data collection in viewing facilities can be undertaken without social distancing and facial coverings, then it can proceed. So what about in-home? Well, throughout COVID, so for the last, since mid-March last year, research participants have not been able to enter people's homes. And data collection has to have been undertaken on the doorstep with, up until very recently, 2 meters apart. Now, clearly, there are environmental limitations to undertaking research on the doorstep. There's lack of privacy, there's the weather conditions, there's the difficulties with communication with your 2 meters apart and so on, using stimulus. All of these different things can be really quite difficult doing things on the doorstep. And, you know, the environmental factors need to be considered in terms of how you then design data collection on the doorstep. You have to think about the length, the topic, the use of support materials, the use of self-completion tools, and the collection of sensitive or special category data, because again, you're on the doorstep, it's not necessarily very private. And the guidance has been very much about encouraging mixed mode to address the methodological and environmental limitations. And the emergence of the knock to nudge phrase, which was something that I'd never heard of before COVID, but that knock to nudge, so you nudge people towards other techniques, whether it's phone or online completion, has been one of the solutions that we have had. So it's doorstep, knock to nudge, completion using other modes, particularly for long studies that can't be done on the doorstep. But we do need to resume in-home at some point. This isn't about trying to stop in-home face-to-face data collection forever. We have done the position that we've had, the guidance that we've had, for very good reasons, but there is a need to move on and move forward. And so the intention is to run some pilot projects, in-home projects, in August. We've got a small group of companies that are going to do some pilots in August, with a view that in-home can resume from September. This is still the plan, but this plan is dependent upon the assessment of the risk profile for in-home face-to-face data collection, particularly infection rates and vaccine rollout, and also an assessment of interviewer and participant attitudes to in-home data collection. So we have been supported by a number of the research companies and also the ONS, who've been collecting data from both their interviewers and also the participants to see what the attitudes to in-home data collection are, and whether they are getting worse, whether they're getting better, or whether they have stabilized. New in-home face-to-face data collection guidance has been developed, and we will incorporate this new guidance into the general face-to-face data collection guidance, once in-home resumes. But to give you a little bit of a peek what that guidance entails, I'll just run through some of the points that we have incorporated. So you will need to continue to follow the safe working guidance that has been developed by governments. So the outdoor working guidance, rather contradictorily, also has the guidance for doing in-home. So in any in-home sort of activities. So that will apply for the resumption of in-home. Research practitioners will need to be trained in in-home protocols, because clearly what happens in someone's home is quite specific, and the training that you've given for doing things COVID safe in the street and all those kind of things will be different to what happens in homes. So they need to be trained on the new requirements. Only enter participants' properties once an initial risk assessment has been undertaken. So that is could be done on the doorstep, could have been done before, but that's understanding the composition of the household, looking for the availability of suitable room space, hopefully with some social distancing between it, between you and the participant. So that's, what room is suitable for that. Is there ventilation? Making sure that you avoid areas where it's likely to get congested with people, such as stairways and hallways, areas that are used as walkthroughs and so on. Undertake a continuous agile risk assessments once actually in the home. So again, if you've taken a risk assessment about what you're expecting, you walk in and it's different to what you're expecting, then you need to readjust what your risk assessment and do a sort of on the spot readjustment. Can you do mitigations for anything that you might have found that you weren't expecting? And this is also, it is important that offering alternative data collection modes, if that risk profile changes, needs to be an option. So because what you don't want to do is lose the participant, because participation rates are difficult as it is. So if you do go in home and feel the risk profile is not great, then it's about moving people to a different mode. Make sure your research practitioners have adequate personal hygiene equipment. We're also encouraging scheduling of in-home data collection if possible. And this is as much about trying to control as much as possible the in-home conditions. So knowing who's likely to be, the composition of the household, who's likely to be there, whether people understand what's going on, it's not too busy, not too many people, so that social distancing is not difficult, all of those kinds of things. If you manage to schedule the in-home data collection, the intention is that hopefully those kind of issues should be less of an issue. Consider taking breaks during the data collection. Again, this will depend upon the length of the data collection and how long how much time you're taking with somebody, but also how comfortable the participant is or are, if there's more of them, and how the data collection is proceeding, and whether somebody gets increasingly uncomfortable, all these kinds of things. That's what I mean about this is very much a kind of iterative process, and assessing the risk as you go along, and taking a break, and maybe taking those breaks outside so you get a bit of fresh air, particularly if you're in an environment where you haven't been able to improve ventilation massively. All of these kind of factors should be taken into consideration when you're doing the data collection. Reduce risk of transmission when sharing objects. We've got some general guidance already about what you can do with that, but that's again thinking about how you can do things digitally, whether using materials that can be wiped down with hygiene cloths and so on, both before and after use. And also remember, if you do use hygiene products to clean your hands or to clean stimulus materials or whatever else it might be, make sure you take those and dispose of them away from the person's home after you've completed the data collection. And if you are going to repeat a visit to the same research practitioners, if you're going to repeat visits to the same household and participants, try to use the same research practitioners where possible. So it might not always be possible because of the way that shifts are and because of the way that the availability of people might be, but try as much as you can. Again, this is about reducing the number of people from your organisation that you're exposing the participants to. And I think it's also just worth remembering about some of the points that you need to that have been the given throughout this entire process, which you must continue to follow. Risk assessments. I don't think I can't say that phrase enough. Risk assessments for any proposed data collection exercise before beginning face-to-face data collection. Is still the most important step that you are undertaking, and discuss those risks with clients, both clients, external clients and also internal clients, and any mitigations that need to be taken to mitigate those risks. And I think having a discussion to make sure that face-to-face data collection is the most appropriate. It really is the most appropriate in an awful lot of scenarios. And I know that a lot of people feel that they have really seen mode bias and different things during COVID, and really are very keen to get back to face-to-face data collection. And that's fine, because there are a lot of environments and a lot of scenarios where face-to-face data collection is the most appropriate. But don't be cavalier with it, because if it isn't the most appropriate, then clearly it'd be better to use some of those techniques that have less of a risk profile. The liabilities for any risks identified and actions taken must be part of the contract that you have with your clients. So this is more to do from the agency side, but make it quite clear about how those liabilities are being spread, and make sure you have robust training of your research practitioners, all the necessary requirements before undertaking any face-to-face data collection. Still undertake screener questions to determine COVID-19 risks, including others in participants' households. And if there's a delay between recruitment and subsequent data collection, you must repeat those screener questions. But always remember, when you are collecting information with screeners, you are collecting health data, and health data can only be done with informed consent. So make sure you meet the informed consent requirements, which are set out in the MRS code and obviously in GDPR. And consider the format of any stimulus materials. Remember to think about all those things that you can do in a way that cuts out the risks. Okay, so that is the COVID-19 guidance. What about vaccines? There's obviously vaccines have been a very hot topic throughout COVID, both before they were developed and now since the rollout has begun. The important thing is that in the UK, having a COVID-19 vaccination is not mandatory. It is not a legal requirement in this country for any members of the population to take vaccines. It's not the case in other countries, but that is the case in the UK. However, as an employer, you can make it a condition of employment to require someone who is not vaccinated to declare they have not been COVID-19 vaccinated and to provide a reason. So this is about your relationship between employers, employees and workers. So you can obtain that information. It is fair to obtain that information. However, to exclude or treat an individual differently on the criteria of whether or not they have had a COVID-19 vaccine could be defined as discriminating against such individuals. Now, why do I say that? Well, there are a number of reasons why individuals may not be vaccinated, including access to the vaccines. Not so much in the UK, but certainly case in other countries. It can be because of an individual's philosophical or moral beliefs. It can be because of religious beliefs. In terms of some religions have quite strict restrictions on the use of things like vaccines. But it also can be because of health and medical reasons. If you're pregnant, there are some of the vaccines that are not suitable for pregnant people. And again, depending on the kind of vaccines that are available in a country, that could become an issue. But also there are allergies to the actual vaccine ingredients. So with COVID-19, for those with extreme anaphylaxis, for example, the COVID-19 vaccines are extremely problematic. So there are lots of reasons why people might not be vaccinated. But in the UK, we have the Equality Act 2010, which lists a number of protected characteristics that, and this includes religious or ethical beliefs, disabilities, which does include allergies, and also pregnancy. So depending on the reason for not taking the vaccine could determine whether such legislation could apply. So there are a number of issues to consider with regards to sort of mandatory vaccination. And it is a really complicated, delicate discussion and issue. But employers cannot forcibly vaccinate employees or potential employees unless the individuals work in a sector such as care homes where there is a legal requirement to be vaccinated, which is the case within the UK. That was introduced sort of 4-6 weeks ago. But conversely, as employers, you do have a responsibility to protect workers and employees. So things like the reporting of incidents, RIDDOR regulations of 2013, the Health and Safety Act 1974, they place a responsibility upon employers to protect their staff. So, you know, you've got a real tension here between this kind of not being able to force vaccine, but also having to protect your staff. And there are a number of organisations have produced employee guidance on vaccinations, looking at this kind of balance. The UK government guidance, which is up on the slide here, the CIPD guidance, which I think is really good, really does explore the issues, and as you'd expect from the professional body for sort of employers and professional development. They also provide guidance on the sort of how you should manage this process and things you should be thinking about. ACAS have also thought about those issues, and I've put their guidance up as well. I think the kind of CIPD ACAS guidance works very complementary. And also Lewis Silskin, who are HR lawyers, they have a good FAQ section, sort of answering some of the common questions coming through. And I think that's also quite useful. So I've put those links on the slide so you can have a look at those. We are also getting queries about vaccines and participants. So, you know, whether you should require participants to have a vaccine, particularly if they're kind of going into a group environment, for example. Well, the Code of Conduct has Principle 6, which is about respecting the rights and well-being of all individuals, and also that practitioners have a responsibility to not harm or adversely affect participants by their professional activity. So that's Principle 7. And those principles are cascaded out into a number of rules. Rule 8, about not bringing discredit on the profession. Rule 9, about taking reasonable precautions to ensure participants are not harmed or adversely affected. Rule 23, about taking steps to assess and identify and consider the particular needs of vulnerable people. And also Rule 32, which is about ensuring that participants are not misled when being asked to participate in a project. Because again, if there's a risk and that they haven't been told about it, that could be misleading. But it's also not for research practitioners to determine why somebody is not vaccinated, unless this is the specific focus of the research. If you're actually doing research on why people aren't being vaccinated, then clearly that's different. But to exclude someone solely on whether or not they have received a vaccine could be described as discriminating against such individuals. And this also could be in breach of UK legislation, such as the Equality Act, for the reasons I've listed before when I was talking about the employee situation. So again, you've got a delicate balancing act here between not harming those who have not been vaccinated by excluding them and not enabling them to contribute their opinions and attitudes and views to research projects, but then not harming those participants who have been vaccinated, coming into contact with those who've not been vaccinated and potentially exposing them to a higher risk, exposing them to a higher risk of the infection. And also, of course, you've got an obligation, going back to what I was saying before about your employees and workers, about not harming research practitioners. So it's again, this is really, really complicated. And so really what we recommend is that research practitioners should endeavour to design research which allows non-vaccinated individuals to take part while protecting researchers and other participants from potential infection. So consider using things like other modes. And this is really about also about determining, you know, again, how long are you going to is the interviewer being exposed to a participant, because, you know, if something's taking five minutes and things, you know, this is all moot sort of, and you're doing it with social distancing, you're doing it with facial coverings and so on. But if you're doing something where they're together potentially for a long time, and there could be kind of risks, this is when you need to start thinking about all of these balancing acts and these different kind of trade-offs within your considerations. And that was my final slide. And so now it's time for questions. So I'm going to stop sharing the presentation slides so that you can hopefully then see Jane and Sinead and myself in all our glory. There we go. We've only got 2 queries so far, but I am sure there must be more to come. So I will take the 2 that have come up, because they're 2 for me. So I'm sure you want to ask Pepper, Jane and Sinead with some questions too. So the first one is, can we insist that participants wear face masks if this will make our researchers feel more comfortable? Yes, in effect, if your researchers want to wear face masks, and you recruit someone on the basis saying, we are going to this data collection is going to take place with us wearing face masks. Are you okay on that basis? Then then that's fine. And then the participant, as always, then makes the decision. Are they happy to continue wearing their face mask, talking to you, talking to the interviewer or the researcher wearing their face mask, and it's a face mask to face mask conversation. And if the participant's happy on that basis, then that's absolutely fine. And I can understand why people want to still do that. Looking at, for example, the some of the research that we've done with the interviewers regarding the resumption of in-home, it's just also interesting just to see what interviewers' attitudes have been and how it's changed throughout the last, sort of 3 or 4 months, as sort of the vaccine rollout has really kicked in. You know, there still is, both within the participants and also within practitioners, there's still around a third of people who are really quite uncomfortable about the infection, and have a strong preference for having controls in place. And there is still, the latest research is still sort of saying over 60% of people are still feel that wearing facial coverings and social distancing is still important. And we have to reflect that in terms of, you know, we're dependent upon people to agree to take part in research. So yeah, anything that makes them feel more comfortable is the right thing. Is there any detailed advice on what training for practitioners looks like? Is this principally about dynamic risk assessment? It is primarily about that, in terms of, because if you're thinking about the interviewers and researchers don't need training, excuse me, on how to do data collection. They know how to do data collection. You know, that's what they do. That's their job. But it's doing data collection under COVID safe working conditions, and so that's all about being able to do the risk assessments. But also it is on the protocol, so the actual things that you expect people to do in the environments where they're doing the data collection, because that's also different. So as I say, things like thinking about you know, how you measure out social distancing. You know, do you sit down when you're interviewing people? You know, how do you touch surfaces? All of those kinds of things. So it's also a lot of it is also about about interviewer behaviour and being more cognizant of it. Thinking about things like not touching your mouth and nose and all those sorts of things that we've been drilled into us over the last year and a half. On the third question is, are you aware of companies having conducted face-to-face interviews after the last month or so? I appreciate not doorstep. Yes, there are a lot of companies who've done face-to-face interviews over the last month or so. In fact, there have been companies that have done face-to-face interviews throughout COVID, because aside from that period from the middle of March until the middle of May, when there was no face-to-face data collection by anyone, ONS stopped. We stopped. Since then, we have had guidance of some description that has enabled practitioners to do some face-to-face. Going back to what Sinead has talked about within her research about how affected the sector has been, it has been the focus of MRS very much to be as enabling as possible, to enable practitioners to do what they are supposed to do, and to be able to earn money and to do commissions. And while a lot of that kind of moved online, not everything could. And so actually we've had some kind of face-to-face, although it's been, you know, very sort of redacted and controlled since last May. And then some of the companies like the Kantars and also Ipsos Mori, for example, they have been involved in supporting the COVID-19 infection study, which is part of the government's response to all of this. And, you know, they've done a fantastic advert actually for the research sector by going out there and supporting the COVID-19 infection study. That, you know, this has been frontline interviewers on the front line of the response to COVID-19, and they literally have done millions of interviews, which is fantastic effort, and shows how much and how important the research sector is actually towards the government's response to COVID-19 as well. I think, Jane, you might want to say a few words about that, because I know that you've been a very passionate supporter of this activity.
Yes, thank you. And it is getting noticed, but I do think it's one of those things where we have to point out that it was us, because otherwise it becomes people think it's random government or anything else. So I have been spending quite a lot of time talking to stakeholders and getting the achievements of the sector bigged up, if you like. But I mean, it was at such a state of criticality that at one stage I wrote to the government when they were thinking of reordering the list of priorities for vaccinations, to point out that there was an element of the research sector that were key workers, and they were those people going to the doorsteps and supporting that activity. I felt that it was really important that they didn't get left behind, because nobody stood up for them. And as it happens, the government didn't reorder, but it is important that we make it known.
I was going to say, Sinead, also from your side of things, I mean, the research really has shown a shift in terms of the those part of this that were really affected right at the beginning. There has definitely been a movement within the research data as well, hasn't there, in terms of face-to-face and so on.
There has, and I think particularly so on the quant side, because that's where a lot of the focus has been, because in a lot of ways it's been easier to manage that distancing, and the kind of the guidance around it has it's a one-on-one scenario, whereas kind of obviously a lot of qualitative has been more groups. And we've definitely seen a movement. I think, probably early April, May this year was a little bit soon to see the extent of which things have probably opened up since then, from a face-to-face perspective, because I know there's been a lot more open since then. And but that's very much been, that was the kind of area that's been hardest hit throughout. And, the vast majority of it was people saying, it's completely stopped in April, May last year. And, yes, there's still kind of around 2/3 saying that it remains stopped now for face-to-face qual, but that was April, May. So we have, even in that period, we had seen shifted before things were opening up, even more than that.
Yes, because I mean the qualitative research, I mean, there was some that was done, particularly things that were essential, sort of things like testing of medical devices, things like that those kinds of things in a very the viewing facilities did an amazing job. They have done an amazing job since they were opened up in July of last year. They have invested so much in making their facilities COVID safe, and so that participants are safe, but also viewing facility staff are safe, but that people feel happy about being in their environments. And I think that one of the advantages now about where we are in terms of the opening up is that actually there are lots of places and viewing facilities that are COVID ready. There's a whole environment and a whole sort of framework out there that people can access. But and also they have been testing it, as I say, throughout the sort of lockdown period under very limited circumstances. So they've also been able to test all their procedures. So I think that also makes a difference.
Give us another COVID and we'll respond entirely differently.
Well, yeah, exactly. We'll hit the ground running. It's absolutely fine. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I can do without that. We've had an interesting question, for which this is a slightly more tricky one, is, are you able to give some information about potential liabilities involved? For example, if someone does become ill having been to a face-to-face session. This is still so open in terms of actually what the liabilities are. And it's one of the questions that I've been asking government to try to get a clearer steer on, because we got all these, because there have been things like track and trace and things, that these sort of, if you followed certain things, if you followed certain requirements, then it in effect, also it was a case of saying, well, really, how can you tell where somebody got COVID? Really, unless they've been sort of only in one environment where they've only ever seen one person over a certain period, you can't really say where they got it. And so actually proving liabilities regarding infections is actually really difficult. And the insurance industry obviously is asking lots of questions about this, and I've also asked questions of government about this, and particularly when things change in mid-August, when you might have, what is going to happen to track and trace going forward, all this thing about the pingdemic and people taking off removing the NHS app and so on. This is a really live area. Unfortunately, I can't give you a very clear answer on that. I don't know whether Sinead or Jane, you've had any discussions with some of the networks that you're in about hearing anything. Maybe Jane on the FSB, if they had said anything about the sort of liability side.
No, they are. This is the Federation of Small Businesses. They have a joint monthly grouping of professional trade and other bodies which we share concerns and try and get people to lobby for each other. So it's been quite a useful little forum. But they are more concerned about the government sort of passing on liability. So refusing to mandate particular actions and therefore leaving the liability up to corporates and, well, as they said, you've got to take corporate and individual responsibility. That is them negating their own responsibility, because that does mean that a lot of people will suffer, even if you've got insurance yourself against cancellation or anything else. If the government doesn't come out with a very clear statement of what the position is, then that the insurance won't pay out. So I don't actually think it's going to be properly resolved, because it's not in the interests of government to resolve it, to be honest.
I know. Yes, I'm not getting a great deal of feedback to my question that I've asked government on this topic. So I was just saying, and Sinead, because you're actually not based in the UK, is this situation any clearer in France?
It's very different still in France, because we are still operating under less freedom, I guess. We haven't had a freedom day. And I have to say, it slightly freaks me out when I see images of the UK and kind of people indoors, let alone outdoors, without masks. So there is still, you go into any kind of public space in France and people are fully mask wearing, and we're having to show vaccination certificates or negative tests to go into swimming pools or cinemas, and from Monday we'll have to do the same thing for bars and restaurants. So the way of managing it is very different, and to be honest, throughout it has been much more kind of government controlled in terms of what you have and haven't been allowed to do. But I think the government has potentially been much clearer in terms of actually what is allowed and what's not allowed, and so much more has been government mandated, I think, in France than it has been in the UK.
That's interesting. Well, we've come to the end of our questions, so I think at this point I should be handing back to Jane, who can do the goodbyes, but also any closing comments.
Thank you very much, Deborah, and my thanks to Sinead as well for all the work that she's put in on our behalf and your behalf on doing this research. Watermelon as well, who did provide us with that facility, without which we couldn't do it. And we do depend on this sort of evidence when we're talking to government. So those of you who are listening, I would encourage you to keep communicating with us, because without those issues, we really can't go forward. And we have developed quite a good set of government relations, both with government and with the opposition. And so we have various routes in to lobby on your behalf, but it's important that we know what the issues are. And one of the things that I think that this recent crisis has proved is the importance of having a collective voice. So when I talk about having a shared narrative, a collective voice to people in power is important to that. And that does mean you speaking up and telling us what you need as well. I have obviously mentioned quite a few people when I was talking. I do want you to know how many people are supporting all the initiatives that are taking place. It's not just a small group of people in Clerkenwell, or not at all in Clerkenwell most of the time. Obviously, Sinead is proving that we can work from France. And I'm absolutely delighted that we are getting that support and that there's a groundswell of support for things like the inclusion in the Net Zero programme. But again, if you have any comments like that, please do write to me. You know that I respond to my emails, not the shouty ones so much these days, but I do respond to my emails. So please do let me know any other thing that you wish to moan, shout, or talk to me about, and I will find myself or someone to respond to you. But with that, may I wish you all the best in your endeavours. I do hope you do get a bit of a holiday going of some variety. I know somebody was looking outside the window today in one of our meetings and saying, my goodness, or words to that effect, I'm going camping. Well, if you're camping or staycationing or whatever, have a wonderful August. And I look forward to being able to talk to you again. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.